Hi guys, welcome to Vartalap with Aakriti. This is me, Aakriti Anand, and today we are discussing about a very interesting topic, something which Indian government did last month. So we all know that there is a big space race going on amongst many countries. The first space race, the space race of the 20th century, ended with the disintegration of USSR. But now, in the 21st century, there are many other countries which are a part of this race, and India is also one of them. With the successful launch of many satellites and many space missions, last year India launched Chandrayaan 2. Chandrayaan 1 discovered water on moon, and we also were the only country who made the entry in the Mars orbit in its maiden mission with Mars Orbiter Mission (MOM). And recently, Indian Union government took a very legendary decision. They privatized the space sector. Now, what does it imply to India? What does it mean to a general public? What does it imply to the Indian economy? And there are many other questions which pops up in our mind when we talk about India privatizing the space sector, which was until now in control of the government. And still, in many other countries, the space sector is owned by the government. But we took this decision, so I thought, let me talk to an expert in this field and figure out what does it mean for all of us. So that's why today on my show I have got a very special guest. Now I am extremely excited for this interview because it's the first time that I will be interviewing a space scientist. Space science is my area of interest, and I've been dedicated towards it, and I follow every new thing which is happening. So today, my guest is Kartik Kumar. He is a planetary scientist. He is he's ex Mars analog astronaut. He is also an aerospace engineer and now the co-founder of Satsearch. So without further ado, him and understand what is happening with India and what do we mean when we say that the space sector is now privatized for all the private sectors. Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Yeah, enjoying a beautiful Sunday here. The sun's shining, so
You're nice. You look good.
you too.
Thanks. Thank you so much for agreeing to my request and coming on my show and agreeing to talk about this topic here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. And I think, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in the space industry in general. And the recent news in India, I think, is something that a lot of people probably have seen headline news about. But yeah, there's a lot of intricacies and a lot of things that are changing in the industry in India. So it's a good opportunity to get into the mix and kind of get involved.
That's really nice, Kartik, that you are telling us about all of this. So, firstly, you are not in India, you are in the Netherlands. So, how is it going over there with COVID-19 around? Like, are you guys going to work? You're still in the lockdown?
Yeah, so as with most other countries, there was a phase in which we were in pretty strict lockdown as they tried to control the number of cases. So in that period, the government really tried to get as many people as possible to stay home, work from home. Fortunately, it looks now like cases are mostly under control here within the country. So a lot of people are starting to return to regular activities, although bearing in mind, the need for the use of masks and keeping socially distanced and things like that. So I'd say that we're past the worst of the first phase, the first wave. And so hopefully this sets us up for a pretty relaxed summer. But I think the important thing is, what happens when the next flu season starts in the autumn. And so I think at this point in time, people are just enjoying the fact that they can be out and about a little bit while still maintaining social distance. So I'd say from my personal side, I mean, I'm pretty relaxed and I can't complain too much. I've got a nice garden, a nice house, nice area, neighborhood I can walk around in. So I think I probably have it better than a lot of other people. So I don't want to complain. Reason.
Yeah, that's nice. So, are you able to go to your office now? Like, offices are open?
Yeah, so the thing is that I had maybe just the good fortune or the luck that my work was fully remote. prior to COVID anyway. So my team is distributed around the world. We're all actually in different countries. We're a pretty small team. So for us, it was pretty seamless. We were already working using digital tools, video conferencing, chat tools, things like that. So it really have a drastic impact on our ability to do what we're doing. So I typically work from home. For a bit of a change of scenery, I'd go out and work from a cafe or something like that. So that's months. But, in that regards, again, I've had a little bit of fortune that my work was anyway pretty well set up for a kind of restricted lockdown period. So I think I probably have had a relatively easy ride of it so far, which I know I'm fortunate for, because I know there's a lot of other people that haven't had that benefit over the last few months.
Yeah, in India, we're still into lockdown and most of the industries are still not working. We're waiting for the cases to get into control so that, we can all go out and start working again and living a normal life.
Yeah, I mean, I was in India in January, and I went to, in fact, a space conference that was held in Kerala, which was in itself actually a very interesting event because it's part of the story of the bigger picture of what's going on in the space sector in India. But at that time, the first case in Kerala had already been detected. This was at the end of Jan. So I think there was a level of understanding that this virus has already reached Indian borders that early in the year. But I think it's just caught a lot of people off guard because of how swiftly the virus has spread, and of course the death toll as well. So I'm looking forward to. I was supposed to travel to India in March as well, and perhaps even later this year. So I think all of that will probably be put off until next year. So I'm we have a lot of family in India as well. So I'm hopeful that things come under control over the next month or two. Yeah, too.
My next question is not related to our topic today, but because you're from the field of science, I want to ask you. I'm sure you'll have some internal information. Do you think that coronavirus is a bioweapon?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been being a good scientist and a good skeptic. Nothing is impossible, of course, but the question is whether there is evidence to support claims. Now, I haven't seen any such evidence, and I think it's also something to be very careful with because we are in pretty polarizing times, with a lot of pretty polarizing political opinions, and I'm careful in any of these kinds of topics because I just think that it can cause people to, for lack of a better way of putting it, lose their minds.
Yeah.
That can be dangerous for all of us. So I wouldn't comment on it one way or another because I don't have evidence to suggest it. I'm sure that the relevant authorities are looking into that and many other ideas and claims. I think the most important thing now is just to find a way to get through all of this until the vaccine is available. And I try not to speculate on things that I'm not well versed in.
You're always politically correct. Give us some sensational answer.
I think I'd be doing a bad job as a scientist if I was doing that. So I think my science brain doesn't really allow me to do that. And honestly, I think that whatever it is, the immediate thing to focus on now is just finding a way to combat this and allow people to get back to work and continue their lives. All of the sensationalism I'll leave to the news media and to the politicians.
So by when do you think we'll have a vaccine?
I think that's also very difficult to say. See, the thing is that vaccines, I think a lot of people haven't really delved into the history of vaccines. Now, I'm also not a biochemist or a pharmacist or have had any experience in drug development and things like that. So my understanding is only from more or less what I've read. But vaccines are difficult to develop. They can take years, if not decades, to develop. From what I've understood, we're on a really accelerated path, and they're very good signs. There are a few vaccines that are now in stage 3 trials, and the expectation is, if one of those candidates holds up in these stage 3 human trials, that we'll be in a position towards the end of this year to be able to produce the first, few million doses, which will go to frontline workers, people who are out and about. So, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I'm hoping that happens, and then that puts us on a path to have, ramp up production in Q1 next year, and perhaps start allowing the general population to have access to the vaccine sometime over the course of the first half of next year. But,
Okay.
The devil is in the details. I think it really depends on, what happens with these vaccine candidates. And I think the important thing to bear in mind is this is really, really hard science. It is really tough stuff. And, I tip my hat off to all of the scientists who are slaving away in labs all around the world, trying to bring us this vaccine. And it will take as long as it needs to take. I think we need to all have that level of kind of patience, but also respect for what the scientists are doing. And in the meantime, do our part where we can, whether it's social distancing, wearing masks, washing your hands. So that's all the little stuff that we can try to do, because there are people who are day in, day out, putting really long hours into trying to get a vaccine for us. And hopefully, start of next year, we'll see something on the market. But I think the devil is in the details. We'll just have to see what happens with these vaccines that are in late-stage testing. So I've got my fingers crossed.
Well, we got our fingers crossed as well. We want the vaccine to come out as soon as possible so that we can get back to the old normal, and this new normal is something I'm not liking too much. But let's move forward and let's understand what are you doing, because you are in a very different field of work. This is something we don't see generally people doing, especially from where I come from. You're the first space scientist I know. So can you please tell something about it to the audience? What does it imply? Because you have so many feathers in your hat. You're a space scientist, you're an aerospace engineer, you're a Mars analog astronaut, and a planetary scientist, and now you're into business as well. So what got you interested into this, and what does it mean?
Well, I think, most kids, so I've given talks to kids at school, at primary schools, as young as 5 years old. And what you notice at that age is that the default is that kids are interested in exploring the universe around them. And so actually you are an oddball in the class if you don't show an interest, in the stars and the moon and understanding the world around us. So somewhere I think that there is an innate level of curiosity. I think it's part of maybe the core drive, that we have as humans, which is to understand and know our surroundings, whether it is to stave off threats, whether it is to improve our chances of survival and our ability to thrive. So somewhere I think my understanding, my anecdotal understanding is that we're all kind of born with this interest in the world around us. Now, of course, space is something that everyone has access to, because all you have to do is look up at the sky above you, and in some sense, you're peering into space. So I think it is a very simple thing to get fascinated about, because all you have to do is literally tilt your head and look up. And I remember as a kid, looking up and wondering what's out there. I think that's something that a lot of people probably resonates with them, from a young age, having had that kind of desire to just know what's out there. And what's core to this is some pretty philosophical questions. Are we alone in the universe? How big is the universe? How old is the universe? Where did we come from? What is our future? So I think somewhere this is just encoded in some sense, even in our DNA. And so I think I'm not that different in having had that interest as a kid. What's perhaps different is that I had an opportunity to pursue that as I was growing up as well. So I remember when I was 8 years old, my uncle gave me a telescope as a birthday gift. So I had this telescope in my bedroom, pointed out my window. And here, unfortunately, in the Netherlands where I live, there's a lot of light pollution. So you can't really see the brilliance of the sky. But I did spend a lot of time peering through it at the moon. And I found even something as simple as the moon, really fascinating, because if you think about it at some deep level, what you're seeing is another celestial body, and you can make out features on it. You can make out craters, you can see light and dark. So somehow that just got me really interested in this question about what's out there. And I think somewhere, not only is it about the outside world, it's also about kind of your inner world. You know, what is my place in the universe? What's my place in the world? And you know, being so being non-religious as well, for me, this question came to an understanding of the world from the perspective of science. And so in school, you know, I loved physics and maths and chemistry, and that just spurred me on to want to study this more. Fortunately, I had also a supporting home environment that allowed me to explore these interests. And really, one thing led to another. So I had this opportunity in high school as well to, you know, focus a little bit more on physics and maths and chemistry. And then when it came to choosing a university degree, it was kind of obvious to me that I wanted to pick something that allowed me to understand at a better level what do we know about the world around us and what do we not know, and how can we explore the things that we don't know. So I could have chosen a whole bunch of different directions, but honestly, I started with aerospace engineering for a different reason. So when I was in high school or in middle school, I was a big Formula One fan. I'm very glad that Formula One is now returned. You know, after also being locked down during this pandemic. And I saw myself as working as an engineer in one of these Formula One teams. Now, a lot of what is done in Formula One is about aerodynamics and understanding principles of aviation, because in a lot of respects, Formula One cars is an aircraft upside down. So this kind of led me to picking aerospace engineering, knowing that I had kind of a background interest anyway in space. Then I went through my bachelor's, and then I had a choice to make, a split in the road, and I had to pick my specialization. And I don't really know why. It was one of those decisions in life when you look back and you wonder, okay, I could have gone left or I could have gone right. I don't really think I made a very explicit choice, but something drove me to say, okay, you know what? I'm getting a chance to go and study space in more detail. So I went down that avenue. So my master's, I focused on space engineering. And what I found particularly fascinating is that space is huge. It's ginormous. It's full of all kinds of interesting things to explore. And yet, some of the most basic things that we understand about the universe come from very basic mathematical equations. So there's some beauty in this idea of starting with something very simple, you know, a couple of equations that I can write on a small piece of paper. That somewhere that explains what's going on in the universe. And somehow that, at a philosophical level, it's still today kind of fascinates me that as human beings, we have enough understanding of the universe around us to be able to capture it in the matter of a few mathematical equations. But simultaneously, the fact that nature itself apparently lends itself well to being described by mathematics, there's some weird connection between science and maths. And me, that was just incredible, because this idea that, especially the idea that you could come up with something in your mind, explore it using the tools of mathematics, and then go and test it in nature. And then on occasion discover that that thing that came up with your mind is actually correct, to whatever degree of accuracy describes the world around us. I don't know. He still fascinates me. It's the core driver for why I'm passionate about science in general. And then more specifically about space, because when you understand that the Earth is but one planet in the solar system, and the solar system is just one star system in a galaxy with billions of stars, and then the galaxy, you know, belongs to a cluster with billions of other galaxies, and on and on and on. To me, it's an incredible perception that, you know, you and I talking here now part of this fabric of universe. And at some level, I think that's what inspires me every day when I wake up. And I just have the good fortune that I've had lots of different ways that I could explore that. But when I talk to people also about, how they get involved in, science to start with, and then space science, space engineering, I think that there's this notion that you have to be extremely smart, extremely talented, to have any chance of doing anything meaningful in this industry. And I don't think that's true. I think that there are some things that are very low-hanging fruit that anybody can do. And as, when I give talks at school to kids, this is what I tell them as well. That yes, for a lot of the very deep science, there is expensive equipment required, maybe advanced training, all kinds of stuff. But deep science and space science start in the act of tilting your head back and looking up at the stars. Because the driver for why we do all of this is that feeling of wanting to know what's out there. And when you start with that, I think it's much more accessible. There's a lot that you can do. There's this whole field that's pretty advanced now called astrophotography. Everyone has, or a lot of people have access to great smartphones that have cameras, and it's quite incredible the degree to which you can take stunning photographs of the moon or stars just using this handheld device and walking around. And so that's how accessible space science is. Yes, there is this very complicated side to it, where there's huge projects involving a lot of very smart people. But space science is also simply, taking a smartphone out of your pocket and pointing at the stars above and trying to capture it somehow. So I got into it, I never had a plan to do all of the things that you mentioned. I just had a fascination with this at a deep enough level to follow my instinct, and where opportunities presented themselves, I tried advantage of those opportunities. But in that sense, I guess I'm not really special. Maybe I'm special in the sense that I've had that opportunity to do that, which is one of the things that I think we do have to work on as a society, which is to prop people up and give as many people an opportunity, whether it's science or whether it's something else. But once you have that opportunity, the thing is that a lot of the starting points for whether it's space science or something else are pretty simple. There's a lot of very accessible tools around. And I think the smartphone is a fantastic example. The idea of the smartphone puts so much power in the hand of the individual. And even space science is something that, a smartphone is a tremendous starting point for, whether it is your camera, whether it is, just being able to look on Wikipedia and read up, on some of the basic concepts of space science and engineering, whether it's these online courses that you can follow. There's tons of both free and free online courses. So, yeah, I think that there's really not a lot stopping people from getting involved. As with most things, it really comes down to a level of commitment and willingness and desire to do it. And yeah, so my story is just an example of where you can get if you just follow, what
Yes, Kartik. I mean, you're so passionate about space science that it shows, the way you speak about it. And there is one question which people are repeatedly typing over here and they want your opinion on it. You spoke about hundreds and thousands of stars being out there and billions of galaxies out there. And with the recent discoveries, we have also found out that there are many Earth-like planets out there. So, what is the possibility of aliens? Like, have they visited us already? Have you ever spotted a UFO? What about all the videos that we see on the social media?
Yeah, so again, the devil is in the details here. There is a difference between kind of general sensationalism and hardcore science. I think if you're a scientist, you generally try to stay away from absolute truths that, something doesn't exist or something won't happen, because the world we've discovered in the universe is so weird and wacky that it's difficult to make any proclamation like that. So for me to say there's no alien civilization out there, I wouldn't be a good skeptic. I wouldn't be a good scientist to say it. Of course, what scientists try to work with is probabilities and likelihoods, and trying to use the laws of logic to understand what follows from what. In the case of, so if you talk about aliens, if you ask me whether these kind of little green creatures, if we're going to find them, I'm pretty skeptical about that. But if you broaden the topic to the question of whether we will find life elsewhere in the universe, I think that's pretty likely. And I think most space scientists will tell you that it's likely to be a question of when rather than if, just because there's overwhelming evidence suggesting that it's likely. For instance, if you look at what are the ingredients for life, for instance, on Earth, all of the research done over the last 30 years or so, both on celestial bodies within our own solar system, whether it's the planets, whether it's the moon, whether it's the asteroids, comets, there's a suggestion that there are likely to be multiple places in the solar system where life has a very good chance of existing. To give you one example, there's a moon in our solar system called Europa. So Europa is a very popular target for astrobiologists because we believe that there is a global ocean. So there's a thick ice layer, and underneath that ice layer, there's a global ocean. And one of the things is we believe that water is a key ingredient for life. Most places we find life, there is a requirement for water, and the chemistry involved with life often requires water. So with that abundance of water on Europa, and then some other conditions like a source of energy and various other things, I have friends actually working on the design of future missions to Europa, including a lander that would drill in through the ice and then send a submersible, like a submarine, into that ocean to take samples, to make measurements locally. And if you ask me, I don't know whether it'll be on Europa or on Titan or on Enceladus or in fact on another star system that we will find evidence of life. But the likelihood is that we're going to find it somewhere. And what underpins this is that we also know that life on Earth, if not in itself due to the transport of material in the solar system, is likely only possible because material gets transported in the early solar system, including water. So when you know that fact, that life on Earth is likely because there was stuff moving around in the solar system, then the chances are just very high that we will find life elsewhere. So to answer your question more succinctly, whether we will find little green men, I wouldn't bet on that, but the bet that there will be detection of life somewhere in our solar system or beyond.
Kartik, one of our viewers here is saying that there are quite a lot of UFO sightings in India as well.
Yeah, so again, the skeptic in me would start by asking a lot of questions. I think that is, in fact, one of the core tools that science gives you is the ability to critically analyze claims. Yeah. So the difference between a nonsensical claim and a real one is often in the details, so the evidence itself. So I can't comment on any specific sightings or, the myriad of sightings perhaps that have happened in India. I think the only thing you can do from a science perspective is subject that to kind of the tools of science. So who took it, when did they take it, how did they take it, was it corroborated by anyone else, did anyone else see it, what is the evidence itself, what was seen, and then you have to start ruling out options, right? Could it have just been a passenger aircraft? Could it have been a drone that somebody was flying?
So in short, you will not agree to alien life unless you will see an alien yourself.
I mean, that's where my heart is as a scientist, right? You don't accept things unless you have evidence to the contrary. And even then, you have to sometimes, question, because your eyes are not perfect, your ears are not perfect, your nose is not perfect. So as a scientist, yeah, I'm skeptical by definition. And that doesn't mean that scientists don't get stuff done. It just means that you're constantly trying to probe whether what you have found is real. And that is how you discern conspiracy theory from scientific theory. So again, I don't claim that any of these sightings are not necessarily true intrinsically. The only thing you can do when a claim like that comes up is to analyze it. And I think from what I've seen, just in general, none of these claims have stood up to these tests. Most of the time you discover, oh, it was something else, or and in some cases it remains unexplained. Science also doesn't have an answer to everything yet. So who knows, maybe 20 years from now we'll discover that one of these claims was actually real. But
yeah, okay. That was quite interesting to know about your opinion on aliens and space. India has recently opened up its space sector for private players. Now, you are again a private company and you are operating globally. What does it imply for a company like you?
yeah, so maybe I'll just briefly share. So I'm co-founder of a company called Satsearch. We're based in the Netherlands, but my co-founders are based in Germany and Italy. And as I said, we're a fully remote team. Our business is kind of interesting in that sense. So we're building something like an Amazon, but for space engineers. So part of our job is to create this global database of all the products and services that are sold by companies all around the world that are used in satellites, rockets, ground stations, high altitude balloons, all of these kinds of things. So these last few years working on this has given me a chance to really dive deep into what's happening at a global level in the commercial space industry, but then also at a country level, what's happening in the US versus, for instance, here in Europe versus in India versus in Japan. India is a very interesting case because the economy as a whole, pre-COVID, at least, is growing pretty rapidly. We'll have to see what the impact of COVID is on the economy as a whole.
Very bad. You all are trying to struggle and get out of it.
So maybe that's a topic for another day. But of course, the space industry has not been unaffected. In fact, the first half of this year, there were a whole bunch of projects, a whole bunch of missions that the Indian Space Research Organization had planned that have had to be delayed because of COVID. Because, you know, at the end of the day, the space industry is still companies and organizations full of people doing work. And so those people have also not, you know, been restricted from going into the factories and into the offices and places where this work gets done. So the industry has seen a slowdown that way. India is interesting because, you know, the Indian Space Research Organization has actually existed for quite a while. It's existed for,
since 69.
Yeah, so yeah. It's quite a well-established participated in a lot of the early successes in the space industry, and also now has contributed a lot towards furthering both our interest in using space for terrestrial purposes, but also for deep space exploration and bringing, for instance, humans to space. So all of these kinds of endeavors are being pursued in India. The thing is, India has also got a massively talented pool of people.
Yeah.
There are a lot of very talented scientists and engineers in India. And I think over the past, especially the past decade, because of the changes that have been going on in the space industry, without going into too much detail, basically the cost of getting to space and the cost of building stuff launched into space has dropped drastically. That is actually because of innovations like the smartphone and other things that have helped to produce technologies that allow people to launch satellites much faster, much quickly, much reliably. And so a lot of these talented engineers in India, just like in engineers all around the world, have started to see that with dropping the price, that there was a chance for them to start experimenting with doing it, in fact, in their own garages, in their own bedrooms. Much in the same way, you know, how the general hacker and maker movement has taken off in the last 20 years or so. So it's gone from, you know, something that was so expensive and so difficult that only a government could do it, to now people being able to build satellites in their garage. Yeah. So this has in fact happened. In fact, there are a number of very, very interesting commercial space companies in India that have been started like just a bunch of very enthusiastic people who found a little bit of capital somewhere and then have built something in their garage. And the challenge is that the Indian ecosystem has not been set up to absorb this. Basically, this has happened so rapidly that the government regulations weren't prepared to take advantage of the fact that all of these young people were starting their own enterprises and had their own ambitions and had visions on how they could make business of what they're doing. So over the past decade, this has been like the push and pull, where the government's been trying to figure out, okay, how do we manage this where the government is still able to support the needs of the country, whether that be national security, whether that be relating to disaster management and all kinds of other things that the government itself has an interest to provide for the general population using space assets and space technology. But at the same time, they don't want to stifle innovation and all of these very smart people who are coming up with great ideas on how to use this technology. And in fact, to do it faster than perhaps even the government could do. So that's taken a very long time. It's been an ongoing discussion in India. But basically, in recent events, the government has decided to start opening up the ecosystem to allow these small companies to participate, to work in collaboration with ISRO to make use of ISRO facilities. But the thing is that the intention is very good. The complication is, as you can imagine, with politics, with socioeconomic factors, with things like national security, etc. Government has to tread carefully, or at least they feel they have to tread carefully and do this in a responsible way. The challenge with that is that inherently slows down these small teams that want to move fast, right? So you have this bit of friction and a bit of. But finally, these announcements, these intended reforms, are recognizing that if India doesn't open up to private players, talented people will find a way to get things done. And if India isn't the place to do that, what will happen is they will pack their bags and go elsewhere. And that, of course, in the long run can be very detrimental to the country. We've already seen that to some extent with the brain drain associated with the IT sector, the tech sector. So how do you prevent that from happening with the space sector as well? How do you prevent all of these super talented people from deciding to set up shop in the US or in Europe or elsewhere instead of in India? For that, the government has to make it attractive for a business to operate in India that is using space, is producing for space. So this is a very important step that has been taken, but there's a lot more work that has to be done to flesh that out. And I know a number of private companies now that have also raised some level of funding from investors. They're all begging the government to speed this up because they have all kinds of incredible plans, incredible products and services that they are developing. And so they're just waiting for the government to open up the process to allow them to rapidly iterate and build their businesses. And I think it will happen. It's just a matter of, it's a matter of going through this bit of chaos at the moment. And they'll figure it out.
So, wow, I think it's really exciting for everyone that India has now taken this big step. SpaceX is one of the most popular private space companies. Do you think the next SpaceX is going to come from India?
I mean, I don't think that there's any reason that it can't, barring the government not keeping to its word and opening up the sector. I also think that, the space industry is actually really vast, and SpaceX has caught the imagination of the general public, which is great, because of the incredible achievements that they've managed to demonstrate, but also because of the cult of personality of someone like Elon Musk, right? And so I think that the question, I would phrase the question differently. I would phrase the question rather than is the next SpaceX going to be in India? I would ask it more in terms of, are we going to see more and more private companies in India utilizing space and generating value for society using space and being able to build sustainable, thriving businesses? And I think, that is going to happen. How quickly it happens will really come down to how quickly these regulations and things like that are sorted out. But if you ask me, like, Are there people who can build big, exciting companies in the private industry in India? Absolutely. In fact, they already exist, and I know quite a few of these companies that are operating in India. They don't lack any ambition. They are dreamers. They have big ambitions on what they want to do, what problems they want to solve, what opportunities they want to open up. It's just now a matter of getting all the ingredients in place, getting the framework in place to allow them to do what they are passionate about doing. Then I think, yeah, we will see more SpaceX-like companies, not just in India, elsewhere as well, because this process is going on in a lot of different countries. And the way we will reap the benefits is in a whole lot of ways that affect our daily life. One of the things that I think that people don't understand is how embedded space technology is in our daily lives already. For instance, if you just pull up Google Maps and you map your way from A to B, you are using space technology. Whether you like it or not, you are using space technology. And so there are lots of examples like that in the medical sector, in the media industry. There's lots of ways in the financial sector that space plays a role already. So I think that that's really a starting point. There's an opportunity to do much more with space technology, and hopefully this change that's coming in India will really just unlock all of this potential that's there and allow all of these super intelligent, enthusiastic people to pursue their individual dreams and passions, and at the same time help produce a lot of value for society.
Yeah. You said in the last answer, you spoke about Indian talent going out in other countries and working. You yourself are an Indian, and now you are working in the Netherlands. You worked in Austria. Why is this happening? All this talent is going out and working in other countries. What can India do apart from opening up the space sector in order to attract all this talent so that we can grow Indian economy as a whole?
I think that's a pretty complicated answer, so I'm not sure I have the full picture. I can give you a little bit of my personal perspective from my own experience and then what I've seen going on. But I think that this is actually a pretty major socioeconomic question, something that I think, like economists are spending time trying to understand and politicians are trying to understand. So from my perspective, actually, it was my dad who actually made that move. So I grew up here in the Netherlands, but in the 70s, my dad made that move to leave Mumbai to go and study in the UK. And then he set up shop in the Netherlands. And so I can't speak for myself for having made that move, because that move was kind of made for me by my parents. But I think that it comes down to seeking opportunities. Ultimately, people want to realize their potential and maximize what they believe their contribution can be to society, but also what their personal desires and ambitions and goals are. So I think if you ask the question in terms of, okay, all of these people are leaving, and what are they getting elsewhere that they are not getting in India, you can start to answer this question. So I think, for instance, there are things relating to how the government sets up regulations and the framework to be able to set up a business and operate a business. Secondly, there is investment in education, investment in, for instance, investment in broadband internet connection. I think that the internet has done something amazing for the world, but there are large swaths of major countries like India that are still largely not connected by broadband internet. And I think bringing broadband internet to these communities will help people also to start building their careers where they are rather than going elsewhere. I think that there is also this deeply cultural thing, which is, if you look at the countries that people go to, I think that it's also clear that the places that they're going to, there are certain social values as well that maybe attract the ability to, the idea of having the freedom to do what you want to do when you want to do it, the ability to think freely, speak freely. So when we look at the I think it also starts in the home. It starts with what our expectations are of each other and of next generation. So, when a kid is growing up, what are the expectations from the parents, from, the community around that child, from society more broadly. And I think in many cases in India, we're grappling with that because there have been some very tried and tested ways for people in India to think about success, whether it is becoming an engineer, a doctor, a lawyer. And I think that, it'll take time, but as the middle class grows in India, there'll be more freedom for people to think more broadly and think about, their son or daughter becoming an actor or an actress, or becoming a sports person, or going into academia, or starting a business. And so I think it comes from this idea of liberalizing, and you can liberalize, more formally in terms of government liberalizing, but I think it also comes down to individuals. At some level, we have to liberalize our minds. And I think that the more that happens, the more likely we will see people staying in India and building their futures in India. This is just my anecdotal understanding. But I think that you're starting to see that anyway a little bit. See that a lot of people who went to, for instance, the US in the 90s, early 2000s, built their fortunes there. You see many of them are starting to return to India, starting new ventures in India, starting new social projects, starting new businesses. So I think that it's happening. It's going to take a little bit more time because we probably haven't set up the framework well enough. But the government taking steps like this, this teeny tiny step that's to reform the space industry is, I think, an act towards reforming government as a whole. The challenge we have is that these things usually take more than the time of a single term in office for a prime minister. These are things that are not changes that occur on a 5-year timeline. You're talking of decades of investment. So you have this challenge that if the politics keeps changing and policies change, then how do you bring about long-term change? And I think it starts with investment in basic infrastructure, investment in education, in healthcare, in access to things like the internet. And the more we do that in India, I think the more we'll see people building their success.
Yeah. That's amazing, Kartik. Here, people want to know a little bit more about you. So Sheila, she's my friend, she's asking, you're getting a lot of female attention on the show. So Sheila is asking, where are you from? Which place?
So my dad's side of the family is from Mumbai, and my mom's side from Bangalore. I was born in Bangalore, but my family is from Tamil Nadu, so a little bit of a mix of the South, basically.
Good, you should connect with Sheila. She's also a South Indian from Germany living in India. Now, my sister has a question. She's asking, what is your take on Elon Musk's mission? Do you think we will shift to Mars? If yes, then what is the guarantee that we will not be destroyed too? We will not destroy that too.
That's quite a complicated question. So I'll try my best. There's many layers to that. So, someone like Elon Musk, he has a personal burning desire to see humanity becoming a multiplanetary species. And in his vision, the most important step we can take now is to be able to get people to Mars and to be able to set up an independent society on Mars. This is tied into a much deeper discussion. Why do humans have the desire to go into space in the first place? You can look at the industry, and there's intrinsically, if you look at it on the face of it, we don't have to go to space. We launch satellites that help us with weather prediction, with the stock exchange, navigation, internet communication, TV, whatever else it is, and none of that involves a human being in space.
Yeah.
But I think that if you ask the question about why humans should go into space, there's many sides to that coin. I won't discuss all of them because that's like a 1-hour discussion, but just to mention a couple of things. I think at one level you can compare it to the question of why people do extreme things on Earth. Why do people push themselves to reach the summit of Mount Everest? We know that there's nothing intrinsically at the top of Mount Everest, right? There's nothing there. There's been plenty of people there, and we know that there's nothing particularly interesting at the top itself, other than perhaps the view or whatever. And yet, year on year, or season on season, we have hundreds of people who attempt to summit Mount Everest. And I think part of that is this deep desire to push the boundaries, to push ourselves as human beings, because we believe that by doing that, we improve ourselves, right? So part of this venture into deep space, whether it's sending humans to Mars, whether it's sending humans to the moon, or even beyond, is part of this internal drive that we have, which is to push the envelope, to see how far we can go. And I would even compare it to, why do people try to run the 100-meter race and try to run it faster and faster and faster? Because at some deep level, we are interested to see how far we can push ourselves. So that at some level, is part of Elon Musk's drive and a lot of other people's drive to get to Mars. The other is that we know that, there are catastrophic events that happen every so often here on Earth. For instance, we know roughly every 100 million years, we can expect a fairly major asteroid impact on Earth. This is likely what precipitated also the downfall of the dinosaurs, right? 65 million years ago, the last major impact. And so part of this idea of going to Mars is to have this second source of DNA. Having people on Mars means that if the Earth is in some way impacted by an object like an asteroid to the point where all of humanity dies out on the Earth, that we still have another planet where we have people, right? Where it's not an event that kills off all of humanity. So it's an act of self-preservation as well. And then lastly, there's this argument which is along economic lines, which is, socioeconomic lines. It's similar to the reason why the people who left Europe to the Americas to settle in the Americas, why they left in the first place, right? They felt persecuted. They felt that they couldn't live by their own terms and their own rules. And they wanted certain freedoms that were not afforded to them here in Europe. So they decided to get in a boat and go to the Americas. And when they ended up there, there was nothing there. I mean, there were the Native Americans who were there, but nothing had really been developed. If you look at an area like New York, which is, a thriving metropolis now, it was all marshland. So in a lot of ways, it's a similar analogy because people were thinking about the future, what they could make of a place like, the Americas. So similarly, there's this desire to go to Mars to simply have more room and more space for people to be themselves, express themselves. Now, what makes Mars difficult, of course, is that Mars is intrinsically not hospitable. Firstly, we don't believe that there are major sources of flowing water on the surface, and we know that water is very important for us. We do know that there are glaciers at the North and South Pole where we have access to water. But secondly, Mars lacks a global magnetic field, which means that all of this incoming radiation from the sun, which brings in pretty harmful high-energy particles, on the Earth, we have a shield from that because of this global magnetic field.
Electromagnetic field.
Yeah.
This is
So we don't have that shield on Mars. So on the surface of Mars, you're exposed to this high level of radiation. There's, of course, the atmosphere itself. There isn't oxygen.
There isn't
environment. The temperatures on the surface are not particularly hospitable either. So yeah, there are a lot of questions. Why would we want to go to such an inhospitable place? Someone like Elon Musk who just believes that it is part of this process that we as humanity are undergoing to expand and explore. There are some counterpoints to that, and I think the question there was also your sister asked about, are we going to go there and destroy it? One of the things that we as human beings don't do well is that we don't see our environment well, at least not on long time scales. You can see that with the way we treat the oceans, you can see that with the way we treat the air, you can see that with just how we dump garbage in places. In fact, space is no different. We have the problem of space debris or space junk from derelict satellites and rocket bodies and stuff like that that are floating around the Earth now. So yeah, there is a question. Is it responsible and ethical for us to go and settle on Mars, knowing that we as humans generally have the propensity to crash wherever we go? So do we have the right to go and destroy a pristine place like Mars? The other side of that equation also is it comes back to something we were talking about earlier. One of the basic questions of space science is there life elsewhere in the solar system? And Mars is one of these places that we believe that even if there isn't life today, that there was past life, because we believe that Mars in its past was much wetter and warmer. So it's likely to have, there's a high chance that there was some form of life on Mars. But the problem is, if you're measuring for life, the one thing you are worried about is contamination. Are you measuring life that you brought with you from Earth, right? So when you look at these Mars rovers that go to Mars, they go through an extremely intense process to clean them, basically, of any contaminants, to make sure that we're not contaminating Mars when we go there. Now, by definition, sending humans to Mars is contaminating the surface. And so there is this argument within the space industry, some space scientists who believe that it is irresponsible for us to send humans to Mars now until we've had a chance to really send enough equipment to Mars that can study this question of whether there is life on Mars before we contaminate it. Because once we contaminate it, the chances of being able to detect life and know that it is independent life of life that we brought with us from Earth is pretty narrow. So I would say that even within the space industry, there is an open dialogue about this. Like, should we be going to Mars? Should we be having, this impact on another planet?
Continue. You were telling us about Mars, when we can reach Mars, and when are we going to have that time when we can, just go on a vacation to Moon or take a vacation to Mars?
Yeah, there's a lot of companies working on this now. So timelines are always difficult because it turns out that the complexity of doing this is very high. So things always go wrong. They always take longer. But having said that, things are improving. The industry is moving along now a lot faster than I think it was even 10 years ago. I believe that in the next 5 years, we will see humans back on the moon for sure.
What? 5 years?
Yeah, because
really?
A lot of space agencies are working on this, particularly NASA. And there's a lot of private companies now who have technologies and the ability to bring people that far. So I think we could see a first attempt to send people towards the moon already in the next couple of years, and likely the first astronauts landing on the moon already before 2025 in any case. I think before 2030, sorry, we will likely see an initial attempt to send humans to Mars. Probably we will.
So this is 2030. That means in our lifetime we'll be able to see man landing on Mars.
That's my belief. Yeah, I think we are not further than probably 20 years away from seeing people actually walk on the surface of Mars. But the way this works is it's always in steps. So you don't send humans, for instance, directly to Mars to land on the planet. In likelihood, we would send people to swing by the planet. You do a lot of testing and stuff before, because the actual act of landing is also very dangerous for a whole bunch of technical reasons. So I think probably in the 2030s, we would see people walking on the surface of Mars. And then we will probably start seeing the first space stations where private citizens can pay to go and take, like a 2-week vacation in the next 10 years. And I think in the next 5 years, we will already start seeing private individuals paying to go to the edge of space. There are a number of companies now that are offering the ability to not necessarily go into orbit, but to get to 100 kilometers altitude, which is the kind of the formal definition of the edge of space. I think that will happen in the next 5 years, because there are already companies like Virgin Galactic is a good example. Virgin Galactic has had somewhere near, if I'm not mistaken, 6,000 people put down a deposit. Of course, these things are very expensive. So at the moment, it's all rich people putting down money. The way to think about it is the same way it happened in the aviation industry. In the beginning, flights were really for rich people. They were also the super luxurious, experience flying. But as technology matured and the industry understood a little bit more how to build out at scale, the price of a flight went down, right? To the point where now pretty much everybody, if they have the means, can fly. And I think that a similar thing will happen with space travel. In the beginning, it will really be the reserve of the multimillionaires and even the billionaires. But in time, the price will drop. And I think at some point we will see that a ticket to the edge of space will be $5,000 5,000 euros, something like that. Which, okay, it's still expensive, but it's a lot more doable and much more reasonable. That's on the in the territory of like a fancy vacation.
So if you would get a chance to go on Mars, which is going to be your favorite place where you would like to go and spend some time?
On Mars?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a difficult question. There's a lot of amazing places on Mars. Firstly, the polar caps themselves are quite incredible. They're the biggest volcano in the solar system is on Mars. It's called the Olympus Mons. It's part of what's known as the Satsearch complex. It's 3 times the height of Mount Everest. And the base is basically about, if I'm not mistaken, 1/3 the size of France. So it's a huge volcano, but you know it doesn't rise very steeply. It rises in very shallow fashion. So you could potentially trek for a couple of weeks, starting from the edge of Olympus Mons to the summit. One of the interesting things, because of the physics, is that if you're standing at the top of Olympus Mons, because of the height of Olympus Mons and also how thin the atmosphere is. So on Earth, we have shooting stars, right? And shooting stars are basically particles, stones, rocks that fly through the atmosphere. And because of friction in the atmosphere, heat builds up and they burn up. When they burn up, they leave a streak in the sky, and you see this thing called a shooting star. Well, on Mars, you have the same thing. It's just that because the atmosphere is much thinner, these rocks that fly through the atmosphere, they burn up at an altitude that is lower than the height of Olympus Mons. That means that if you were standing on the summit of Olympus Mons, instead of, like on Earth, looking up at shooting stars, you would look down and see shooting stars below you.
Really? Below you?
Yeah, so that's something I would love to see. I think that is a crazy experience, to be standing on the top of Olympus Mons and looking off the edge and seeing shooting stars, below you burning up. There's lots of other stuff. Valles Marineris is also the deepest and the longest trench in the entire solar system. It's about 4,000 kilometers long. And one of the activities that I think would be amazing to do is to bungee jump off of the side of Valles Marineris down the trench.
How would you do it? Mars doesn't have the similar amount of gravity like Earth.
No,
so
exactly.
Wouldn't you be floating, or you would just dive?
No, so there is gravity, right? So you would descend, but because of the lower gravity on Mars, it would take you a lot longer to drop. So you would be able to bungee jump and essentially for minutes, basically slowly coast down the trench. And I think that would be just incredible. You get this beautiful panoramic view while you're slowly descending through the trench. So there's lots and lots of amazing places on Mars like that. I know on the glaciers, for instance, the glaciers are made of both carbon dioxide and water. And because of the carbon dioxide, so carbon dioxide freezes as dry ice, but it sublimates, so it goes directly from solid to gas. And because you have these hot spots, what happens in the polar caps is every once in a while when there's a spot that's warm, the carbon dioxide that's solid inside will start heating up and it'll form a gas bubble, which will create pressure, and then it'll try to find its way out of the ice, and basically it'll explode like a plume of gas. So one thing you could do is you could go skiing on the polar caps. You would see randomly these jets of gas shooting up around you. So yeah, I mean, I could go on. There's plenty of.
Just getting to the last one. So when these gas bubbles will shoot up, is it going to be a similar view of what we see in the images from Europa, wherein water explodes from the moon, or is it going to be different?
I think it's more like you will see just some ice breaking and then basically like this gust coming out. I don't know exactly what speed the gas comes out at, and but it's an interesting idea just because the polar caps have a lot of dry ice. So anyway, there's in fact I think at some point somebody will write, Lonely Planet.
Yeah.
Do you know the Lonely Planet books that are used, by people for backpacking?
Lonely particles.
Lonely Planet.
Lonely Planet, which is Mars.
No. Lonely
No.
Planet is a brand of tourist guides. So if you're going to another country, you can buy like the Lonely Planet for the Netherlands, and it includes a whole bunch of useful information as a backpacker if you're traveling around the country. So I think at some point
Right.
somebody will make a Lonely Planet for Mars as well, which is kind of like a tourist guide to Mars, because there's incredible places on Mars to go.
Yeah, there is a question which Aditya is asking again and again. He wants to know that can coronavirus survive in space? Do we have any answer to this?
I am not sure on what the current level of research is on this, but it is a very important bit of research, not just about the COVID-19 coronavirus, but in general how bacteria and viruses survive in space. We know that they are extremely resilient. In fact, I believe that outside this International Space Station, exposed to the full harsh environment of space, they have taken swabs and they have discovered that there are bacteria on the outside of the ISS, which is incredible if you think about it, in vacuum, exposed to the full radiation, with the incredibly cold temperatures or hot temperatures if you're in the sun. So I don't know specifically about this coronavirus, if it survives in space. I do know that the astronauts that are going to the space station, including a couple of astronauts that SpaceX launched, they took a lot of precautions to make sure that they were not carrying the virus, of course, to the space station. Because when you're in the space station and you have this virus, there's nowhere to go. It's very difficult to isolate, right? So they took a lot of precautions in advance. But it's actually a very interesting area of study, not just from the perspective of do they survive in space, but space is also a very interesting place to study these viruses in the first place, because you have eliminated the effect of gravity to some extent. It's free falling, and so this gives you the ability to do certain types of studies that you can't easily do on Earth. I don't believe that they have sent any virus specimen to the International Space Station, but I might be wrong. There might be some ongoing.
Yeah. Okay. There is no space in space. Krunal is writing. Krunal is also asking that is it possible to fire a gun in space, because technically it's all vacuum. Would we be able to fire a gun in space in the vacuum?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately a gun is just a projectile coming out of something that is propelling it forward. And so you could fire a gun in space if you have a gun that is retrofitted so that it generates some sort of force on a projectile. There are even some ideas that use this. For instance, the idea of using harpoons in space to clear up debris. So I don't think that I don't know whether you could use any gun, like if you just take a gun that you find. Hopefully, you don't find a gun lying on the street. But if you find a gun lying on the street, I don't know.
I don't know who Krunal is trying to kill in space.
Yeah, maybe so. I haven't spent enough time thinking about this, but in principle, the idea of propelling a projectile in space, I mean, we do that to some extent anyway, because that's how spacecraft move around, not by shooting a projectile, but by shooting out some material. This is how rockets work, basically, is you shoot out material in one direction, and then the spacecraft moves in the other reaction to that. So gun is kind of the same idea.
So there also has been talks about terraforming Mars and making it Earth-like. It's a far-fetched idea. We have the technology today, but do you think it is something which we should do on a moral perspective? Because we've already ruined our own planet. We see pollution and dirt and debris everywhere. Should we be doing something like this to another planet? Or is it playing God?
I mean, that is an interesting question. I would take contention with the claim that we can do it. I don't believe that we can large-scale change a planet. If we could do that here on Earth as well, right? Like, if we had the ability to do geoengineering to the point of terraforming Mars, and so there are these skeptics that say, okay, well, if you could terraform Mars, why not use that technology to Earth back, right? So I don't think one excludes the other. I think, in fact, the idea of terraforming Mars and investing energy in studying that might actually give us access to technologies that allow us to rectify some of the mess we've made on Earth. But from the ethical side of it, whether we should do it or not, again, I think it's difficult because I think it comes down to this very philosophical debate about whether the universe is there for us as human beings to explore and go into and make use of, or whether we are supposed to keep stuff pristine, and not affect the environment that we live in. I don't know really which direction I swing on. I think I can avoid the philosophical question by just saying at the moment I don't think it's practical anyway, so it's not a question that needs to be answered.
Yeah.
Right. But I can imagine at some point, if you've got a few million people living on Mars and, you want the ability to live somewhat like you live here on Earth, that people start thinking about changing wholesale some features of the planet. But yeah, I think that is such a sci-fi idea. I don't think that it's not worth studying. I just don't, my time horizon is shorter than that. So I leave that out. We'll figure it out.
Well, thank you so much, Kartik. You gave us a lot of knowledge about Mars because you were also a Mars analog astronaut. And I know that you're doing your PhD on Uranus. Now, this is my personal question. Why is this planet have a tilted axis? All the other planets are by far straight, but this one has a tilted axis. What is the explanation behind?
Well, firstly, we do know that planets have tilt. So the Earth has a tilt of 23.5 degrees, more or less, which is what gives us seasons, right? Uranus is weird because its tilt is 97 degrees, which means that it is more or less lying on its side. So, most planets revolve around the sun like this. Uranus revolves around the sun like this.
Yeah.
There is active research on this topic. In fact, just earlier this year, there was another paper published on this question. I think the prevailing idea now is that something impacted Uranus and knocked it over. The early solar system was quite a chaotic place with a lot of stuff flying around. In fact, a connection to this, to give you an example of why studying the moon is so important, we know a lot about the early universe from counting craters on the moon. In fact, the far side of the moon has a lot of craters. And understanding those craters, dating those craters, counting craters, that has actually helped us to understand that there was this phase in the early solar system called late heavy bombardment, when, due to some complex stuff in the solar system, asteroids or comets were flying through the solar system and impacting stuff. So we believe that some fairly large-sized body impacted Uranus and caused its axis to shift. What makes it a little bit crazy, where these theories, have a lot of explaining still to do, is that not only did Uranus tilt, but Uranus has moons and rings. Moons and rings, they went along with that tilt. So it's not like the planet itself just tilted. In fact, with Uranus spinning this way, the moons and the rings also go this way. So that means that, well, there's two scenarios, right? Either the planet tilted and then the moons and the rings formed afterwards, or if they formed before, somehow everything moved. Now, the likelihood of everything moving, I think, is pretty small. So the idea is this happened very early in the solar system. The planets were still forming. But there's some details in that haven't been figured out. And what makes Uranus very special is because of that tilt, its geometry with respect to the sun is very unique. We know that the sun has had a profound effect on what the solar system looks like and what all the planets look like. So, yeah, the impact of that sun geometry with the tilt of Uranus, is likely also to have had some very weird effects on Uranus. And we know that Uranus is a weird place. There's all kinds of weird things that have been observed, and my PhD is actually going towards trying to explain one of those weird observations. But yeah, I mean, to me, it's my favorite planet, not just because I studied it during my, I studied it extensively during my PhD, but also because it is kind of the odd one out. Although every planet in some way is the odd one out because they all have very peculiar features. But Uranus is kind of like the rebel, almost like the bad boy, like everyone is working this way, through that at this kind of. So there's something very peculiar about Uranus that makes it a very special place for scientists.
Okay. Wow, that's very interesting. Thank you so much, Kartik, for your time and telling us so many things about space, about your life, and about what Indian space race implies for all of us. And just one more question, which has been asked a lot of times. Do we have the technology to manipulate time? Would we ever be able to do it?
Ooh, I mean, this is also a very complicated question. It goes into deep quantum mechanics and like the basic theory of everything. So, I mean, yeah, I don't think I can answer that easily. I think there is this basic principle in physics, basically the first law of thermodynamics, that kind of suggests that this, let's say, classical idea of traveling back in time, that isn't possible. But we do know when you get down to the quantum level, all kinds of weird stuff happens, including what they call time reversal. I don't know enough about this to be able to comment on it, but I think that I wouldn't hold my breath that, you know, in our lifetimes that we will have time traveling machines. But I do think that at the quantum level, there are all kinds of these weird, wacky effects. And maybe there will be some interesting applications of that. I think particularly in computing, there are some very interesting ideas around using these quantum properties. Maybe somebody will figure out how to control this at large scale.
Yeah.
But yeah, honestly, I don't know enough about that to be really commenting on it.
Yeah. Okay. That was really nice, Kartik. Thank you so much for your time and thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge with us. It's a pleasure to have you on my show.
Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me. And as I said, you know, I'm more than happy to answer questions also afterwards. People can ping me. I think it's also a very exciting time in India. So, you know, people who have a deep interest in space science and exploration and technology, this is a good moment to pay attention because, you know, there are lots of opportunities popping up. Yeah, and maybe we can have a chat sometime in the near future again when things have moved along a little bit as well from these latest announcements.
Absolutely. So all the people who are trying to message over here, you can contact Kartik on his Instagram account or on his Twitter. The Instagram account is right here. It's called Karkum84, Karkum 84. So Kartik, I'm sure you're gonna get a lot of requests, a lot of attention from people after this, and I'm so happy that you came and you did this with me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoy
Take care. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks.
Bye.